I spent months trying to be the perfect husband while my wife was busy being the perfect cheater. I thought I was fixing our marriage until I found out she was fixing dinner at a hotel with her boss. Hello, everyone. Get ready for this mess because this story has more plot twists than a soap opera and just as much drama. For 2 years, I thought I was the problem in my marriage. Turns out the problem was having dinner at our house every weekend and playing with our kids. Yeah, it was her boss. The same guy whose wife I was making small talk with while our spouses were apparently making much more than small talk. Let me take you back to when I genuinely believed I was living the good life. The perfect storm of marital bliss. Picture this, a 43-year-old guy thinking he's living the American dream with his wife of 16 years, 2 great kids, and what he believed was a rock-solid marriage that survived the typical young couple drama. I'm talking about those perfect Saturday afternoons where I'm flipping burgers on the grill, my wife's laughing at something our neighbor said, and both kids are running around the yard with grass stains on their clothes. Our 14-year-old daughter was thriving in school, our 9-year-old son was that kid who made friends everywhere he went, and I honestly believed we were crushing this whole family thing. This wasn't some social media fake happiness either. I genuinely thought we had built something special together after working through our early marriage struggles. My wife managed a major advertising company and pulled in serious money, while I worked in engineering building a decent career. Between our 2 incomes, we could afford the kind of lifestyle that let us focus on being present parents instead of constantly worrying about bills. Sure, I wasn't perfect, but I was the guy who remembered anniversaries, helped with homework, and actually showed up to school events instead of making excuses. The comedy gold here is that I was so focused on being a good husband that I completely missed the obvious signs that my wife was getting her emotional needs met elsewhere. When she started becoming more distant and critical, I did what any logical person would do and assumed I was the problem. The classic guy move, right? Instead of questioning her behavior, I questioned mine. Instead of wondering why she suddenly had impossibly high standards, I figured I needed to step up my game and meet them. What makes this whole situation even more ridiculous is that her boss was more than a colleague. He was practically family, grilling burgers alongside us every weekend. Talking about people who spent every other weekend at our house, whose kids played with our kids, and who knew where we kept the spare key. Their daughter was practically a 3rd child in our house, and our son treated the place like his second home. These weren't just work colleagues who showed up to the annual company picnic. These were the people we called when we needed someone to watch the kids, the ones who helped us move furniture, and the couple we'd sit around the fire pit with on Saturday nights talking about everything and nothing. I remember countless evenings where all 4 of us adults would be sitting around our kitchen table after dinner, kids running around the house, and I'd be thinking about how lucky we were to have such solid friendships. The boss would compliment my wife's cooking, she'd laugh at his jokes, and I'd just smile thinking it was nice that my wife had such a supportive work environment. His wife would tell stories about their family trips, and I'd mentally note ideas for our own vacations. Meanwhile, my wife would chime in with how well-organized and thoughtful her boss was, and I'd nod along like an idiot, thinking she was just appreciating good leadership qualities. The real kicker is that when my marriage started feeling rocky, I actually went to this guy for advice. Picture this scene, me sitting across from my wife's affair partner, genuinely asking him how to be a better husband. I'm talking about those man-to-man conversations where I'd admit I was struggling to make my wife happy and ask for his perspective since he seemed to have such a great relationship with his own life. He'd give me these thoughtful responses about communication and effort, nodding sympathetically while I explained how frustrated I was that nothing I did seemed to work anymore. Which makes it even crazier that I asked my own nemesis for marriage tips. This man sat at my dinner table, ate food I grilled, watched football games in my living room, and gave me marriage advice while he was actively destroying my marriage. The level of audacity required to maintain that level of deception is honestly impressive in the worst possible way. He'd pat me on the shoulder and tell me that marriage takes work, that women need to feel appreciated, and that I should keep trying new approaches to connect with my wife. Meanwhile, he was apparently connecting with her in ways that would have gotten him punched in the face if I'd known. The most pathetic part is that I was actively trying to model myself after this guy based on my wife's constant references to him. She'd mention how he handled difficult clients, how he organized team meetings, how he remembered details about people's personal lives. I took notes like I was studying for an exam, thinking I could improve our marriage by incorporating his professional strengths into my personal life. I bought books about leadership and communication, thinking maybe I could learn to be more like the man she clearly admired. Looking back, the signs were more obvious than a neon billboard, but I was too busy trying to be the husband I thought she wanted to notice that she already had the man she actually wanted. When she'd come home energized and happy after work events, I'd feel relieved that she was in a good mood instead of questioning why her mood improved so dramatically around her colleagues. When she'd mentioned staying late for important projects, I'd offer to handle dinner and bedtime routines, proud that I was supporting her career ambitions. The whole situation was like a bad sitcom where everyone in the audience can see the setup except the main character. I was the guy applauding his wife's professional development while she was developing something much more personal with her boss. The biggest threat to my marriage wasn't some stranger I'd never met or some random guy trying to hit on my wife at a bar. It was the man whose hand I shook every weekend, whose kids called me uncle, and who helped me carry groceries into the house when his family came over for dinner. The enemy was literally breaking bread at my table, and I was passing him the salt. But even with all this happening right under my nose, I somehow managed to miss every single warning sign that should have been obvious to anyone with half a brain. Red flags I completely missed. The warning signs were practically screaming at me, but I was too busy trying to be the world's most understanding husband to hear them. My wife started this thing where she'd constantly bring up her boss in conversation. Not just work stuff, but everything. She dropped lines like, "My boss always brings flowers on Fridays, and he never forgets his wife's coffee order," as if I'd get a playbook from him, not her. At first, I thought she was just sharing workplace observations, maybe even trying to give me helpful hints about being more thoughtful. I actually took notes sometimes, thinking I was getting free marriage advice from someone who clearly had his act together. What I didn't realize until much later was that these comparisons had been going on for 2 years. Spanning the entire duration of what I now know was their affair. She'd mentioned how he organized his home office, how he planned family vacations, how he remembered details about his wife's day. Instead of wondering why she was keeping such close tabs on this guy's romantic gestures, I started buying flowers on Fridays. When she mentioned he sent his wife encouraging texts during stressful days, I started sending encouraging texts. The man was basically giving me a playbook for how to treat my wife, and I was following it like gospel while he was already implementing the advanced course with her. What really should have tipped me off was how she'd get this dreamy look when talking about him compared to the annoyed expression she'd wear when talking about me. She'd light up describing his latest project management strategy or how he handled a difficult client, then immediately shift to criticizing how I loaded the dishwasher or forgot to put the toilet seat down. The contrast was so obvious that our kids probably noticed it before I did, but I was too focused on trying to measure up to her impossible standards to see the pattern. My wife started asking me why I couldn't be more like him in increasingly specific ways. Why didn't I take initiative without being asked? Why couldn't I anticipate her needs? Why was I so clueless about romance? These weren't general complaints about our marriage. They were basically her asking why I couldn't be her boss. I thought she was challenging me to step up my game, so I went full research mode. I bought relationship books, watched YouTube videos about being a better husband, even signed up for one of those online courses about emotional intelligence. The book told me to plan surprise dates, so I planned surprise dates. They told me to be more spontaneous, so I tried being spontaneous. They told me to listen more actively, so I listened more actively. Every gesture was met with lukewarm praise because she was comparing notes with her affair partner, not me. She'd accept the flowers, but mention how her boss chose better arrangements. She'd go on the dates, but compare them to places her boss had taken his wife. Nothing I did was ever quite right, but instead of questioning why she had such detailed knowledge of another man's romantic habits, I assumed I was just really bad at this whole husband thing. Her behavior changed in ways that should have been obvious red flags, but I interpreted them as personal growth. She started dressing better for work, buying new clothes and spending more time on her appearance. She seemed more confident and energetic, especially on days when she had work meetings. She'd come home from company events practically glowing, talking about how inspiring the leadership team was and how much she learned from collaborative projects. I thought it was wonderful that she was finding fulfillment in her career and developing professionally. She started working late more often, staying for important meetings and urgent projects that couldn't wait until Monday. When I'd offer to handle dinner and bedtime routines, she'd seem relieved and grateful, which made me feel like I was being supportive of her ambitions. She'd text me updates about how the meetings were running long, or how the team was making real progress on critical deadlines. I'd text back encouraging messages and tell her not to worry about rushing home, that I had everything under control. The criticism escalated to the point where she seemed genuinely irritated by my existence. Simple things like how I chewed food, how I organized the garage, or how I interacted with the kids became sources of frustration for her. She'd roll her eyes when I'd tell stories at dinner, sigh when I'd suggest family activities, and generally act like spending time with me was a chore she had to endure. But she never acted that way when her boss and his wife were around. During those gatherings, she'd be animated and engaged, laughing at jokes and participating in conversations with genuine enthusiasm. What's embarrassing is how I'd actually seek validation from her boss about my relationship concerns. During those backyard barbecues or family game nights, I'd find myself talking to him about marriage stuff, asking for his perspective on how to keep relationships fresh and exciting. He'd give me thoughtful advice about communication and effort, nodding sympathetically when I'd admit I was struggling to make my wife happy. He'd tell me that marriage takes work, that women need to feel appreciated, and that I should keep trying new approaches to connect with her. This guy would sit across from me at my own kitchen table, eating food I'd grilled, and give me sincere advice about how to save my marriage while he was actively destroying it. He'd pat me on the shoulder and tell me not to give up, that every relationship goes through rough patches, and that the key was persistence and creativity. Meanwhile, he was apparently being very persistent and creative with my wife in ways I couldn't have imagined. I was getting relationship counseling from my wife's affair partner, taking notes on how to win back a woman who was already emotionally invested in the guy giving me the advice. The level of deception required to maintain the charade is honestly impressive, and the level of obliviousness required to fall for it is honestly pathetic. I was the husband asking another man how to make his wife happy, never realizing that other man was already making her very happy in ways that had nothing to do with my efforts. For 2 years, I lived in this alternate reality where I was the problem and she was the victim of my inadequacy. I questioned everything about myself while never questioning anything about her increasingly suspicious behavior. But sometimes the truth has a way of forcing itself into the light, even when you're doing everything possible to stay in the dark. The night everything changed. The moment that changed everything happened on a Tuesday night around 10 p.m. when we were both lying in bed doing our usual routine. I was reading on my tablet and she was scrolling through her phone like every night. The bedroom was quiet except for the occasional page flip and soft tapping sounds from her screen. Then I heard something I hadn't heard in months. My wife was giggling. Not just a little smile or quiet chuckle, but actual out loud giggling, like she was watching the funniest video on the internet. She was staring at her phone screen with its huge grin on her face, making these little happy sounds that I honestly hadn't heard from her in forever. My first reaction was genuine happiness because she seemed so genuinely delighted by whatever she was looking at. I set down my tablet and turned towards with a smile because seeing her laugh felt like finding water in a desert after months of her being cold and distant. I figured she was watching some funny cat video or reading jokes from one of her social media groups. I thought this might be one of those rare moments where we could connect over something silly and laugh together. So I did what any normal husband would do when his wife is cracking up next to him in bed. I asked her what was so funny. Simple question, right? I mean, when someone is laughing that hard at something on their phone sitting right next to you, it's pretty natural to want to share in whatever is making them so happy. I wasn't being nosy or demanding or trying to invade her privacy. I was just curious about what had put her in such a good mood for the first time in weeks. Her reaction was like I had just asked her to hand over state secrets. She immediately viciously pulled that phone away from me and held it against her chest like I was trying to steal it from her. The giggling stopped instantly and her whole face changed from happy and relaxed to angry and defensive in about 2 seconds. She looked at me like I'd just committed some terrible crime by asking a simple question about what was making her laugh. I asked again what was so funny, thinking maybe she just didn't hear me the first time or was still distracted by whatever she was reading. That's when she completely lost it on me. She started yelling about how I was being invasive and couldn't she have any privacy in her own bedroom. She was acting like I had demanded to read her diary or go through her personal belongings when all I did was ask about something that was making her laugh out loud right next to me. The whole situation was so ridiculous that I actually started laughing a little bit myself. I told her I wasn't trying to invade her privacy, I just wanted to know what was so funny since she seemed to be having such a good time. I mean, think about it. If someone's cracking up at their phone and you ask what's funny and they get furious at you for asking, that's pretty weird behavior. Normal people share funny things with their spouse, especially when they're laughing that hard at something. She kept clutching that phone like it contained nuclear launch codes and telling me I was being controlling and suspicious. She said I should trust her and not question everything she does on her phone. The whole argument was insane because I wasn't questioning anything until she made it into this huge dramatic scene over a simple question. If someone showed me something funny on their phone, I would just show them what I was laughing at. That's what normal couples do. What really got to me was how out of character this whole reaction was for her. In 16 years of marriage, we used to show each other videos and pictures all the time. This sudden secrecy over something that was supposedly just entertaining was completely unlike the woman I married. I started thinking back to other times recently when she had been protective of her phone and realized this wasn't the first time. She had started keeping it face down on the table during dinner and taking it with her to the bathroom, which she never used to do. She would get nervous if I was nearby when she was texting and would angle the screen away from me, even when I wasn't trying to look at it. These behaviors were all new within the past few months. The argument went on for another few minutes with her insisting I was being paranoid and me trying to explain that I just wanted to know what was funny. She eventually said it was just some stupid meme from a coworker and that it was none of my business anyway. If it was just a stupid meme from a coworker, why couldn't she just show me the stupid meme from a coworker? The whole explanation made no sense, and her anger about it made even less sense. I finally dropped it because the fight was getting ridiculous and I didn't want to wake up the kids with our arguing. She put her phone on the nightstand face down and turned away from me to go to sleep. I lay there in the dark thinking about how strange the whole situation had been and how defensive she had gotten over something that should have been completely innocent. Normal people don't guard their phones like Fort Knox when their spouse asks about something funny. That night, I couldn't sleep because something felt fundamentally wrong about the whole interaction. The woman lying next to me had just acted like a completely different person over something that should have been no big deal. In all our years together, even during our worst fights, we had never had an argument about her refusing to share something funny with me. The secrecy and defensiveness were so out of character that I knew something was seriously wrong. I spent the next few hours lying awake, thinking about all the other little changes in her behavior over the past months. The phone protection, the working late, the constant comparisons to her boss, the criticism of everything I did. Individual things that I had explained away as stress or personal growth suddenly seemed like pieces of a puzzle I didn't want to solve. My gut was telling me that her reaction tonight was about much more than protecting a funny meme, and that her secretive shift was more than just stress. That night, I lay awake realizing I needed to figure out what was really going on with my wife, but I had absolutely no idea how to go about it. Amateur detective work. The next morning, I decided to stop guessing and just ask her directly what was going on. Over coffee, I told her that her reaction the night before had really bothered me and that I was starting to worry there might be something she wasn't telling me about work or her relationship with her colleagues. I tried to approach it calmly and rationally, thinking maybe if I created a safe space for her to talk, she would just come clean about whatever was happening. Instead, she absolutely exploded at me again, accusing me of being paranoid and controlling and insecure. She said I was imagining problems that didn't exist and that my suspicious behavior was creating tension in our marriage. She went on this whole rant about how I needed to trust her and stop looking for reasons to doubt her integrity. The conversation became this circular argument where she kept insisting nothing was wrong, while simultaneously getting more and more defensive about my concerns. I asked her directly if she was having an affair or if there was something inappropriate going on with her boss. She looked me right in the eye and said, "Absolutely not," with this tone of voice like I had just accused her of murder. She said she couldn't believe I would even suggest such a thing and that I was being ridiculous and hurtful. The denial was so strong and immediate that it almost made me feel guilty for asking, but something about her reaction still felt off to me. That evening, I worked up the courage to ask if I could look at her phone just to put my mind at ease. She immediately said no and asked why I would need to see her phone if I trusted her. I explained that I wanted to trust her, but her secretive behavior was making that difficult, and that showing me her phone would help reassure me that nothing was going on. We went back and forth about this for almost an hour, with me explaining that I just needed some reassurance and her insisting that my request was inappropriate. Finally, she threw her hands up and said fine, if looking at her phone was going to end this ridiculous argument, then I could look at it. She handed me her phone with this annoyed expression like she was humoring a child having a tantrum. I opened her text messages and immediately noticed something weird. There were conversations with her coworkers and friends and family members, but when I looked at the message threads with certain people, including her boss, there were these obvious gaps in the conversation. Like, I could see a text from 3 days ago, and then the next message was from yesterday with nothing in between. It was clear that messages had been deleted, and recently too. I asked her about the missing messages, and she said she sometimes deleted old conversations to save storage space on her phone. That explanation might have made sense if she was deleting entire conversations, but she was clearly deleting specific messages while leaving others. The whole phone inspection was basically useless because she had obviously cleaned it up before handing it over to me. I could see evidence that conversations had been deleted, but I couldn't see what those conversations actually said. I spent the next few days feeling like I was losing my mind because I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't prove it. The deleted messages combined with her defensive behavior and the whole phone giggling incident added up to something fishy, but I still didn't have the smoking gun I needed. I was walking around the house looking at my wife and wondering if she was lying to my face about having an affair. I finally broke down and called my friend Mike, who works in IT, and asked him if there was any way to recover deleted text messages from a phone. He said it was possible depending on how recently they were deleted and whether they had been backed up to the cloud. I felt weird asking him to help me spy my wife, but I was desperate to know the truth about what was happening in my marriage. Mike came over the next weekend when my wife was at her book club meeting and spent about an hour working on her phone. He was able to recover some of the deleted messages, and what he found made my stomach drop. There were bits and pieces of text conversations with her boss that were definitely not work-related. I'm talking about good morning messages and late-night texts, and conversations about missing each other and planning to meet up. The messages weren't explicitly sexual, but they were intimate in a way that made it clear these two people had feelings for each other that went way beyond professional collaboration. There were references to inside jokes and shared experiences that I knew nothing about. I saw messages like, "I can't wait to see you sent at 2 a.m., which was definitely not a work request. There were texts about how much they enjoyed spending time together and how they wished they could see each other more often. Reading those fragments felt like getting punched in the gut because they confirmed what I had been afraid to admit to myself. My wife was having an emotional affair at minimum, and probably a physical one too. The woman I had been married to for 16 years was sharing intimate conversations with another man while lying to my face about it. The recovered messages showed this had been going on for years, not just recent months. The betrayal was so complete and devastating that I actually threw up after reading the messages. But even with those fragments, I still didn't have the full picture of what was happening. The recovered messages were just pieces of longer conversations, and they didn't give me details about when or where they were meeting or how long this had been going on. I knew now that my suspicions were correct, but I also knew that confronting her with partial evidence would just give her another opportunity to deny and deflect. She was clearly skilled at hiding evidence and lying about her activities. But even with those fragments, I still needed the full story.
3 weeks later, my
strategic.
wife announced she had a work emergency on Saturday morning that would require her to go into the office for most of the day. She said there was a critical client presentation on Monday,
and the team needed to pull together all the materials over the weekend to make sure everything was perfect. The way she explained it made it sound like this was a make-or-break situation for a major account, and that her presence was absolutely essential to getting everything done on time. I nodded along and told her I understood that work emergencies happened and that I would handle everything at home with the kids. She seemed relieved that I was being so understanding about her weekend plans and started gathering her laptop and work files like she was preparing for a major business meeting. She even mentioned specific details about the client and the presentation timeline, which made the whole story sound legitimate and well thought out. But something about the situation bothered me enough that I decided to do a little fact-checking after she left. I called the ad firm's main line around noon, figuring that if there was really a major emergency going on, someone would be there to answer the phone.